This is my microphone. I'm supposed to hold it, which I'm actually kind of excited about. Apparently during the Q&A, Elena is going to throw it at you if you ask a bad question. So it's soft. But it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today and our guest of honor, alum, Dr. Chris Reddy. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. I don't know really where to start with this intro, but I just want to say a few things about Chris. I have literally known Chris almost my entire career. I started here at GSO in the mid-90s, and he was here. And at the time, I took Michael Pilson's chemical oceanography class, and I had already come in with a master's degree, and I didn't have to take the core classes, but I wanted to take chemical oceanography with Dr. Pilson. And Chris and I were talking about Michael Pilson recently, earlier today, and Chris made a comment that I thought was spot on, and that is that he is quite honestly one of the best and most incredible generalists in oceanography ever. And, you know, Michael's class was amazing, and at the time, Matt Charette, who was also a student here, was the TA for the class, and his best buddy at the time was Chris Reddy. And when all the students were panicking over not understanding a concept or preparing for one of Michael's legendary exams, it was always Chris who would come in with Matt and talk us all through calming down, best practices and test taking with Michael Pilson, because if you've ever taken an exam from him, they're pretty intense. And there are probably like 57 questions that you have 40 minutes to answer, right? So it's just very straightforward and easy. Anyway, what I remember about Chris is that he was always the person who had the answer, who was supportive, who could talk you through anything, talk you down from anything, could critique something in an honest and straightforward manner, scientifically and otherwise. That was the most valuable input that you could possibly get at that moment. He was honest, he was open, and he was fair. And I think he's still that way. If you've had the chance to come to the book signing and talk to him or buy his book, if you have not read it, it will really move you. There are so many parts of it where you think about the journey a scientist has, and especially as we all aspire to not only discovery-driven research, but translating that research into policy-relevant and management-ready science. That is a far cry. And then stepping into the zone where you not only engage the public, but have to engage major corporation, major infrastructure, major industry partners, the federal government, and things can go really, really smoothly or not. And the journey he takes us on in his book is absolutely that ride that is incredible. I found myself laughing, crying, being inspired all simultaneously. And I think that pretty much says it all about the kind of person and the kind of scientist that he is. So it's my honor to pass this off to Matt Dunn, who's going to officially introduce Chris. But Chris, I'm honored you're here. I don't think you'd ever have imagined that I would be dean of the Graduate School of Oceanography, but I'm... Thanks a lot. But it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you and hand you off to Matt.
This thing is so awkward, so I'm going to go put it over here, so it looks like I'm talking normally. So before I give my little 2-minute spiel on Chris, I'm glad to hear that chemical oceanography always sucked, that class, because it was also really busy for us too, until I was the TA, and it was great. So I'm Dr. Matt Dunn. I recently graduated here from the chemical oceanography degree, similar to Dr. Chris Reddy, and I've gotten to get to know him a little bit these last couple months through interviewing him for STEEP, the Superfund Center led by Dr. Rainer Lohmann, who's over there, my former Ph.D. advisor. And one of the things that made me so interested in talking to him and helping to make this talk come to reality was that most people with a statistics page like Chris, they don't really write short, thin, easy to read, fun books like Science Communicating in a Crisis. They usually write textbooks. And we talked about this briefly during our interview. Was because, in science, it's really easy to look at stats like your H-index, number of papers you have, and a quick literature review of his website proved that he has quite impressive stats. Over 2,000 papers published, 11 patents, I think? 200. Order of magnitude isn't a big deal. 11 patents, and he's in the top 1% of ResearchGate. I definitely got that one right. But, so it's not every day that you have somebody with those, very impressive technical statistics actually taking time to talk about science communication, which I'm sure he'll mention it in his talk. There's really not great relevant statistics for. There's not things like an H-index, which is how you measure, the influence of your papers. There's not as much recognition always given, even though it's really, really important. And so that's what we're going to hear about today from the great Dr. Chris Reddy. So, over to you.
How are we doing? Okay. Thank you, Paula and Matt, for having me here today, and super excited to be here. Driving down from Woods Hole, and I was trying to remember the first time I spoke in an auditorium at the GSO, and it was the day before classes started in the fall of 1993. It was orientation. 25 students. We all had to stand up and introduce ourselves. Let me paint you a picture. All 24 other students did not grow up in Rhode Island. All 24 other students did not grow up in Cranston, Rhode Island, and had not lived less than 5 miles away from Cranston, Rhode Island. So I stood up, and I'll never forget, I opened my mouth, and it was like the jukebox, got unplugged, because everybody else in the room had heard a local. My accent was horrible. And it was just, think like Ben Affleck in the Dunkin' Donuts commercials. Just awful, awful. And, you get by, and I remember going home that night, and I was talking to my girlfriend at that time, and I was like, I am never gonna pull this off. I am totally outclassed. I am so rough and so coarse and unrefined that I'll never pull this off. And in reality, I did. And, if this was Good Will Hunting and I was Matt Damon, Jim Quinn, my Ph.D. advisor, is Robin Williams. And where's Jim? There's JQ. So we're going to start off by thanking him, outstanding Ph.D. advisor. So the circle is complete. My accent's a little bit cleaned up, and we're going to have a good time today. And feel free to catch me afterwards. If I don't get to talk to you later, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to talk. So James is going to give me. Am I supposed to do something, James? Oh, it's off my laptop. Oh. All right. This will be fine. Do we see it? Okay, good. That was not that bad. Okay. Okay. You're at a party, or you meet somebody, you meet people in the first time, and they say, hey, what do you do for a living? Right? I think I'm a chemist. Actually, I am a chemist, right? I identify as a chemist. But if I tell somebody, say, oh, what do you do for a living? And you say, I'm a chemist, 9 times out of 10, their nose crinkles, and they'll tell you that they almost burnt down their 11th grade lab. Okay. Then you could say, well, I'm a scientist. And I am. My title with Oceanographic is senior scientist. So I could say I'm a scientist. The problem with a scientist for folks who are not in science is it's difficult to wrap their heads around. It's just hard for them to wrap. And unfortunately, the default is last pick in gym class. And the lab coat and the bow tie and the kick me sign. And that's a stereotype that we never want. In fact, that stereotype is awful, and we don't want to move past that. But then you can say you're an oceanographer. And everybody's arms open, they love you, they have all these personal connections with you. They're not talking about the high school burning down. They're talking to you about their most fondest memories of their lives. That they were at Scarborough Beach and they went to Aunt Carrie's afterwards, and I love the ocean, and that is the importance of a few things for you. One is that simply how you identify yourself when you're communicating science matters. And 2, and this is great news for us, oceanography opens doors. And that's because when we communicate science, we want to be looking for common interests and shared interests and find out what people matters to them. And the ocean matters to people. So if you're trying to start conversations, start with ocean. It works. Much better than chemistry. In my case, I am a chemist who my lab happens to be the ocean. So yeah, I wrote a book. It came out about a year ago. Super fun. Thrilled that I did it. And I started writing it because, I have family, 3 kids. In the middle of the pandemic, I'm watching the news, trying to understand, my family's lives and our livelihoods and what matters to us. But on the flip side, I was going out of my mind, along with a whole small group of other friends of mine who are interested in how you respond to crises. And going out of our minds about, missteps and miscommunication and, missed opportunities. And I only wish we could have done this. And, that was kind of got me over the hump to write this book was, really, what kind of lessons, how can I use all the mistakes that I have made in my life to maybe help out a little, or at least maybe think I can. And so that was my motivation to write this book. And, my solutions are threefold, 3 approaches. One is that if you want to have effective science communication on any level, you have to start thinking about building trust, that you have to have respect with your other groups. Just because somebody doesn't have a Ph.D., and just because they don't have a lab group, and just because they haven't published 100 papers, or 2,000, according to Matt, does not mean that they're not smart, or informed, or passionate. You have to look past that and appreciate and respect folks. And then the last thing is that I really wanted to drive home that when you're successful communicating science, it's when you understand what matters to other people. And to put it another way, when you're communicating science, you have to figure out that you have a hungry audience. How can you nourish them? How can you make them feel like they just had a nice dinner? But you don't want to make them wait either. And those are the 3 solutions I try to put forth. And I thought that I had an interesting perspective because I've made a lot of mistakes. And I had been on the front lines in a variety of different environmental crises. Not something on the pandemic scale, but I thought that there was a lot of analogs and opportunities to compare and contrast. And I had a lot of stories because one of my brothers once said that I was a Forrest Gump of oil spills. And another brother said that I was an ambulance chaser. And both of them are somewhat true. I find studying oil spills and other things interesting to study. And I'm always curious about what happens. And so I ended up being involved. And next thing you know, you're in the middle of it. And so I was really lucky to see how things play out. And I wanted to talk about that. And most importantly, I wanted to make recommendations to folks that were achievable and attainable and that would make you feel comfortable and also empower you. And that's what I wanted to get into this book. And hopefully, I think I've been working out well on that. So there's kind of 2 big issues that I kind of was watching as the pandemic was playing out. You might quibble with me on this, but I'm going to go broad scale here. Issue number 1 is that scientists only think of you're either a scientist or you're a non-scientist. So there's this binary perspective, and that's a problem. When we don't, as scientists, we don't appreciate the wide range of interests and backgrounds and interests and experiences and knowledge of a much wider group of people who aren't scientists. And that is one of our big challenges as scientists, is to recognize that outside the lab, there are lots of different folks thinking about things and curious about things, and we have to figure out how to package knowledge in the right way. On the flip side, kind of going back to these stereotypes, like it or not, stereotypes hurt scientists. And Bill Nye has done his thing, God bless him, but that's not what we want anymore. And we don't want Sheldon Coopers and any of that foolishness on TVs. Our success in science is when we have a diverse public and a diverse group of scientists. And that is one of our biggest problems, overcoming stereotypes and getting more interested folks in science so that they're communicating it. And I'll get back to this later on this kind of local issue. But these are the big challenges. And we're going to talk about this for the rest of the afternoon. But let me give you a little background. There's one more challenge that we have that really played out strongly during COVID, which is that there might be some folks who would say, well, the problem was that some elected official or some person in news or whomever didn't take cell molecular biology and doesn't understand RNA, DNA, vaccines, yada, yada, yada. True, and that might be useful if we had a more well-informed public, right? That wasn't the problem during the pandemic. We had no shortage of smart people to help out. I think a lot of the missed opportunities and confusion, and I can't control politics, but I think a lot of the things that were missed was that there was an absence of understanding how science works, about how do you explain to people who are non-scientists our culture. Words like peer review and tenure, and I can't say that, or maybe in the grayness of our lives, and is lost on people. The fact that science moves slow. And I'm not saying that scientists should apologize for the way science works, but I do think that scientists and other folks have to understand that science does work, but it works differently. And often we need to communicate that about what it matters when something is peer-reviewed and why we say what we say and how we say it. This is a challenge. But these are easy problems if you have people's attention and interest. Okay, I study oil spills and other pollution events and things like that. I don't know anything about birds, mammals, anything. If you showed me, I don't know anything about any of that stuff. I have no idea about biology. My knowledge gap is incredibly narrow. My interest in oil spills is because oil spills and other pollutants are an uninvited guest to nature. And just like when you go to the cardiologist or wherever and you get put on a treadmill, right? We are interrogating how nature works. So when we perturb Mother Nature with an oil spill, not only are we perturbing it, but we're also getting a front row seat about how nature responds to uninvited guests. The few coastal biogeochemical cycle folks, an oil spill is just an acute release of highly reduced carbon. Somebody's supposed to laugh. My interest is, how does nature respond? What can we learn from that? And the avenues of learning that go twofold. One is if you start to understand how nature responds, then maybe when there's another spill, you can help inform and make the most well-informed decisions. What I'm not going to talk about as well is that you can start to look about how nature responds, and maybe you can use that knowledge when you design next generation materials. And where does nature get stymied, like fluorinated compounds, and where they don't, and how can we use that knowledge of current pollution so that we have less pollution in the future? I'm not going to talk about that as much. My first oil spill was the North Cape. It happened in 1996 at Moonstone Beach, not too far from here, significant enough that you could smell the oil here. Relatively small amount of volume-wise. Often when you read the news, or you hear in the news, and they talk about an oil spill, they'll say it was 500,000 gallons of oil was released. And then the next part is relative to the 11 million gallons spilled after Exxon Valdez. And so there's this perception that you say, oh, okay, then that means that this spill is only going to be 5% as bad as the Valdez. And that's not true, because oil spills are like buying a house. A lot of it is about location, location, location. And unfortunately, this spill was in an awful place during an awful time heavy storms, shallow waters, massive kills, superstar expert, Debbie, my friend Debbie French McKay, URI, GSO alum right there, would know way more than me. Point is, this was my first spill. I got involved in it. I'm going to have 2 readings today. This is my first reading. I'm always self-conscious about readings because I feel like I'm supposed to have the glasses and the suede patches. But we're not going to have that. So, spill happens. I'm working on my Ph.D. on some other types of contaminants with Jim Quinn. And I'm going to jump in this reading. Jim was about to leave on vacation. Before he left, he turned to me and said, quote, "Whatever you do, do not get involved. If a journalist finds out you're collecting samples and approaches you, do not say anything. It's very dangerous. You do not have the training. The media is looking to play gotcha, and if you make a mistake, you could ruin your career." End quote. Jim knew me well. He knew I wouldn't be able to resist poking around, and he was right, because the second he was gone, I basically accommodated a lab and started taking samples and analyzing them. Eventually, this didn't bother him at all. What he was worried about was I would go public and say something stupid, because among scientists, there is little value associated with having a positive interaction with the media. Let's say I'd spoken to a journalist and did a decent job. Maybe I would get 1 bonus point from my career. If I had done a bad job, which was an entirely possible outcome, I would maybe wind up with -5 points. And he was absolutely right to tell me. I was a clueless, cocky kid. I would have been super excited to talk to the outside world about what I was doing, but I had absolutely no idea how to do it. I didn't understand the consequences, and my advisor, Jim, and that's why I can still remember the look on his face when he said, "Whatever you do, do not talk to the media." He wasn't a threatening man, but his expression made it clear that that was off limits. And as it turns out, there's 2 sides to this story. Jim came back and we got involved studying it. And when there's an oil spill, one of the first things you do is you try to get a sample of the oil, the spilled oil, and because that provides a reference point for a few different reasons. By chance, Jim helped. We got 2 samples of oil from that barge that spilled, the North Cape. And we analyzed it, and we found out that the barge, the oil in those holds was different. And in fact, one was more toxic than the other. And we started to talk about it. And eventually, somebody with the state of Rhode Island came down, and it was very clear that, that Jim and I had kind of identified that there was 2 different oils that got spilt. Other folks who were using, kind of looking at the spill and the damages, were using the oil that had less toxic compounds. So in reality, we had identified that the spill was more toxic. And what that meant is that when you do the calculations for an oil spill, which is you break it, you buy it, essentially, it comes to find out that Jim and I had identified a more toxic spill, which would lead to a bigger windfall for the state of Rhode Island. And that was a big deal. That was such a big deal that Peter Lord, is Peter Lord's wife? Yeah. Hi. The wonderful Peter Lord, who's the environmental writer for the Providence Journal, interviewed me about my findings and all the work, and the next day I was above the fold in the Providence Journal bulletin. I was 3 months away from defending my Ph.D. I was at absolute rock bottom in my life. My girlfriend that I absolutely adored had dumped me because she wanted to marry somebody who didn't think about work after 4 o'clock. Absolutely right. And suddenly, I got this jolt of positive impact. I was famous, and I was validated, and my life finally turned around. I was in a terribly bad place, and this article saved me. And then the next day, there was another. I was interviewed by kind of the folksy interview, and they talk a little bit about my life. But the point is that I was interviewed. Jim knew I was being interviewed. I gave this interview with Peter Lord, who was an incredibly respected, unfortunately passed away way too early, reporter. And Peter's on the right. And that was that. So it was 1996. Down the road, I ended up studying more spills and I get more interested in communicating science and take some workshops on communicating science. And I'm thinking I'm pretty good. In fact, I'm thinking I'm pretty good because my first interview, I was a rock star with Peter Lord. That I was above the fold. It was awesome. People, my whole family were sending me cutouts of these clippings. I was on top of the world. And I was so good in all this training that I decided to teach a class on communicating science at Woods Hole Oceanographic. And I had continued to stay friendly with Peter. And so Peter was my first invited speaker, 10 years after my victory tour in his Above the Fold article. And Peter gets up there and he clears his voice and he goes, whatever you do, don't do what Chris did. And he turns and looks at me, and the reason why was he said the kid was off the rails. And he badmouthed the EPA, the Coast Guard. At one point he said, of course I did a better job, I'm smarter than the government scientist. I actually said that according to him. But he didn't put it in the newspaper because Peter explained that that wasn't the story. And he also said that he thought he would have ruined my career. Incredibly wonderful gesture. But for 10 years, I thought I did a great job, and I didn't. But who did a great job was Peter. And this is a really important point to remember, that often scientists look at the media as the enemy, and that's not always the case. More importantly is, if the reporter who was assigned that story was in maybe sports, that story would have come out a different way. Because maybe a sports journalist would have seen that tension and played it up. But Peter saw the story as a different oil and a different impact. And a huge part of my life was the fact that a journalist did the right thing, and but also gave me a really big eye-opening opportunity to look back and say, how many other times did I thought I did a good job, but I didn't do a good job? Okay, more spills happen. Barge in Buzzards Bay, old oil spill, I went back and looked at it. Don't want to get too far into current events. Costco Busan was a cargo ship that left Oakland, California, clipped the Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge, released 58,000 gallons of oil. Also an absolutely terrible spill considering the volume, because again, it was in the wrong place. Spent about 8 years of my life studying the Deepwater Horizon, and more recently helped out with the Russian Federation with a diesel fuel spill in Siberia. This is a cargo vessel in the summer of 2020. Ran aground off the coastline of the island nation of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. Released 250,000 gallons of the 1 million gallons of oil it had on board. Right now, the official reports say that it ran aground because they were trying to get better Wi-Fi. Another cargo vessel that helped out on, in this case, not only oil got released, but lots of small pieces of plastic. There's a theme here that cargo vessels can be very problematic. There's a lot of issues going on. Even before a couple days ago, they switched over to different fuels. Maintenance has dropped down. A lot of the crew are almost indentured servants. Hard for them to get off and get back on, and so it's rather unfortunate. Okay, I just showed you 7 or 8 pictures of oil on the water or something, or a boat broken or whatever, right? And you might say, he just studied the same thing. Not true. Not true from the chemistry perspective, because oil is always kind of differently, and there's different locations, as I mentioned. But it's more than that. That all these oil spills and how folks got involved, what we call the response, right? The response is the collective effort to make a bad thing from getting worse, right? Your house is on fire, you call the firefighters, they are the responders, right? You have an oil spill, you have responders who go out there and they are trying to stop this oil. There are no happy endings during an environmental crisis or any crisis. The victory is making a bad thing from getting any worse. And nobody else gets hurt in the process of it. if you go back and you look and you see how do things work and don't work in terms of like this, suddenly you have an event and you have all these different interested parties suddenly are getting interested in each other. And the success of these events really goes back to how well they can mesh with each other. You do not want different groups of interested stakeholders at an event, the equivalent of somebody trying to put the machinery together of a toy on Christmas Eve. You do not want that rushed, hectic, oh my God, I got to finish this thing in another hour thing. That is not how you want to respond to a crisis. Successful crises work out when there's a little bit more mesh. And a lot of that victory, when this happens, or where you have a little bit better outcome, is when you look at and appreciate the culture of each one of those cogs, right? Every one of those cogs that I just showed you earlier, they all have different languages and attitudes, religion in some weird way. They might eat food differently. The point of the matter is that when you have a diverse group of people with different backgrounds who have a shared interest, things can get very challenging. And things work out best, at least, when you know what everybody else wants and what they need and what they value. Let me put it this way. Let's talk about in academia. Success timelines, probably more like years, but let's say a decade. Like we work in years, right? And my goal is to educate, and success to me is maybe tenure. Traditional media has hours, and they want to inform the public and they want to sell newspapers. The responsible party, which is the spiller, they want to stop this problem. They want to protect their reputation, and they want to keep their stock price high. The governor wants to get reelected. So this is what's at play, is that as a scientist, if you want to have a successful outcome, you have to understand that the people who are interested in what you have to offer have a different wants and needs. Let's put it in a different way. Let's make believe that this is a dinner table, and we go around the room and say, what do you want for Christmas, right? I want to get into the National Academy of Sciences. These people want to keep their stock price up, right? Reporter wants to get a Pulitzer Prize. This guy wants to get elected. The responders want to do their job and just go home safe. And the public wants to know whether or not they need to sell their beachfront property. And that is the trick, is to recognize that people have different wants and needs, and that when they ask you questions, you have to try to frame your answer, not dumb it down because that's insulting. Frame it and answer about how it answers what they want. I started writing this book in the summer of 2010, and I wrote a piece talking about how I was frustrated about how one thing was being handled during the Deepwater Horizon. Funny thing, it says that I wrote about how the reporters mangled science. I did take a shot at reporters, but I also was even harder on scientists in this piece. And this is one big issue that scientists always have with the media. They go, I didn't like the headline. And they get mad at the reporter for that headline, but that's the copy editor's fault. Out of my hands. I don't know how many people have been mad at me because of that title. I didn't say that. I was harder on scientists. Either way, wrote this piece in 2010, super excited, thinking about cultures and how can we make a bad thing from getting worse. And life happens, right? I ended up working on the spill. My wife and I had 3 kids. These 3 ding-dongs, they come along. And, that's what happens with life. And, but, watching COVID and, really just started to drive me crazy is death threats. And this has been bothering me before. I have a couple friends who worked in the Fukushima response in 2011. And these are hardworking and honest and candid and genuine people trying to do the right thing. And there's death threats. And, we can't change some people, but there's got to be a way in which maybe we can help scientists maybe lower or, make the bullseye a little bit smaller. And that was kind of part of my motivation was, if we're having death threats on science, and we're not going to get into the whole big politics side, but how can we make a little less on that side? So I wrote the book, and I want to talk about the challenges that I lay out in the book and provide some solutions, and that are actionable and meaningful and relatively easy to attain. So, first challenge, during the Deepwater Horizon, the Commandant for the United States Coast Guard, Thad Allen, was at a White House meeting. And Thad is a no-nonsense, squared-away guy. And he was frustrated, and at one point he goes, "You don't exchange business cards at a crisis." And his point was that when things are going sideways, and the clock is ticking, and things are potentially getting worse and worse and worse, that's not when you want to find out what matters to each person, and who's who, and what do you do, and what you want. That's the wrong time. And his argument was that, some of these people should have already known who you are, because if there ever was going to be an accident, you would be here. And he was frustrated. Now, that's not necessarily always easy for us to fix. But we can exchange business cards as scientists on what I consider on a local scale. There is nothing wrong as scientists for us to invite the local radio reporter, or maybe the sergeant with the environmental police, or a Coast Guard officer, or somebody who's in a nonprofit with science, or maybe even somebody in the industry, or maybe somebody from the fishing industry, and you sit down and you talk to them, not about what, a lot of times you bring these people in and they tell you all the things that scientists do wrong and how annoyed they are, but finding out what matters to them. You will be surprised how happy people will be when you ask them what they think, if you make it genuine. So how do you exchange business cards? You invite people and you meet with them with coffee. Often food works really well, but you establish connections and you learn about each other, and that is how you overcome these big challenges, is establishing and talking to people on a local scale. And when I say local, I'm going to mention local a lot of times today, local is not just geographic. Local is shared interests, background, experiences, anything where you can find a connection. Work the local angle. It's low risk, high reward, and it's attainable. And I'm going to get back to this. When a crisis happens, any crisis, lay public, and often the media does it because they don't have as much space to publish, they make every event overly simplified. They make an oil spill look like I just put some oil in a 50 milliliter volumetric beret and I'm poorly titrating into a round bottom flask. That's not the case. When you put nature into play, whether it's the ocean or a river or the human body and viruses, Mother Nature is a fickle beast, and and people are different, and climate is changing, and events are changing. Things get significantly more complicated. This is what folks were handling with this plastic spill in Sri Lanka. Ship was on fire, there was acid rain, lots of things going on. The public and the media are presenting something that appears easy. And so you hear all these people going, I don't know why they're doing that, that's stupid. I'd get my WD-40 and I'd spray it out over on the beach and we'd be all set. And this happens and it creates frustration with science because the available data that's out there is incomplete. And one of the challenges that we have is trying to get information out to people with some nuance in a clear and collective way. And that's a huge challenge because people are not give you a lot of time. Right? We're always fighting the clock with people now and communicating them. But we have to realize that that nuance matters. Now, the interesting thing about crises is often the best communicators at responders happen to be the best responders and are the people who are the most talented in running the show. And so now you have, do you send this person to the meeting about how you're gonna work out the next 8 hours, or do you send the same person to a press conference? The press conference will inform the public a little bit more, but that talented responder might help make 50 miles of coastline not get polluted. And this is a problem because this happens because we don't plan for crises, and there's no infrastructure. And like it or not, we just don't have a lot of people on the team early on. But we have to recognize that how things play out and what information is available to people is not necessarily what's full at play. And try to give a little bit more nuance when time is allowed. A little tongue-in-cheek. I blame Steve Jobs for a lot of our problems with science right now because of Wikipedia and phones. Because we have created a culture and a population of people where you say, how many games did the Red Sox win last year? You open up your phone, you type it in, you get the answer in 4 seconds. You get the answer in 4 seconds. It's certain. It's not going to change. And it's pretty easy to understand. 80 games. And it's going to be 80 games tomorrow. It's going to be 80 games the next day, right? And it's clear. So we have a population who have an expectation that in 4 seconds you get the answer and it's not going to change and it's going to be exquisitely clear. That is not how science works. Again, we should not apologize that science is slow and doesn't always fit the norms of people's 4 seconds. But we have to realize that when we communicate to people, we are communicating with people who are getting used to the fact that they want an answer in 4 seconds. And that's a challenge, but we have to at least be mindful of it. And as we move forward, that Wikipedia, not even whether or not it's incorrect, that's a different case. Simply that it's available and there's an expectation that it's going to be easy, clear, fast, and not going to change. The public, a lot of people don't like uncertainty, right? They want things to be told. They don't want it to change. They want to move on with their lives and what matters, right? When you have a crisis, or even in science overall, you know, in science, in a crisis, it moves a lot faster. But, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in an event in the first hours. And so the available knowledge to make a bad thing from getting worse is limited, and it's not 90% confidence. It might be 50%, and that makes things hard. But with time, things become more certain, and you know, and we saw this with the pandemic. With more knowledge, more information, we got more and more understanding, and that's how a crisis works out. The public doesn't like uncertainty. Scientists go into their jobs because the things are uncertain. If a topic is certain, I'm not going to do it. Right? So scientists have to appreciate that the things that we love, we study things that are unknown. It's not, a lot of people want to be known. They want to move on with what is known and move on. And this is another challenge to be mindful of. We can't fix this. We just have to be aware that people want answers. And how do you give them the answers and satiate them as best as possible with the time that you have? All this vaccine foolishness. You know, you can go back and if you read all this, there's one research paper out of 9 gazillion that was poorly done in a terrible journal that had a bad experimental design and poorly misinterpreted, and everything. It's not a very good paper, right? And people are even misinterpreting that. But there is a perception that we fight that science is a house of cards. That one paper out of 10,000 shuts down all of science. And that's not true. right? And this is where we have to do a better job about communicating how science works, because science is not a house of cards. It's the long game of incremental knowledge gaining that's ever expanding and self-correcting. So we don't want to think about science as a house of cards. We want to think about science as this beautiful, beautiful, infinite jigsaw puzzle. Science, this is why we do it, right? That we're trying to put pieces in that, yeah, maybe the result, things will change. Yeah, sometimes we put the wrong piece in a puzzle, but it'll get fixed. Might take time. Now, it gets frustrating to a lot of folks because sometimes those pieces aren't here in this lower quadrant, so we have to go work someplace else. The point is that folks would be a lot better off if we try to do a better job about explaining to people how science works, and that it's not a house of cards, and that we look at the collective body of knowledge, trying to see how things get bigger and better with time. That our picture, this jigsaw puzzle, is not only getting bigger, but it's getting, the contrast is getting better, the resolution is getting better. And we need to celebrate that and tell people that with time, we get better information and we know more. That's my alarm. This is good, I'm right on time. This is awesome. So, being aware about how do we explain to people that, stop it. Science is a jigsaw puzzle and not a house of cards. All right. Your advice for you scientists out there, young and old. 20 years ago, Jim can help me out, Jim Yoder can help me out, NSF, National Science Foundation, rolled out something called broader impacts. It was, when you write your NSF proposals, you had to have this component called the broader impacts. It was the part of what your research may do to, for society. What are you doing, with high school science fairs? This broader impacts is very wide, very broad, still very broad. And when it first rolled out, and even to this day, a lot of my colleagues, and I've done it myself too, look at putting together the broader impacts as a chore. Oh, God. I gotta write the broader impacts to this proposal. Oh my God, I gotta figure out how I can make my work relative to society, and and things are much better. But the point is that a lot of folks look upon public engagement and science communication, and let's call it broader impacts, as a chore and check in the box. I'm gonna give you a different perspective. I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an incredibly lucky opportunity. I think it's a blessing when folks are curious and want to talk to you about science. And here's why. 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 research papers, proposals gets funded. I don't know. 1 out of 10 papers might get accepted for review in Nature. We live in a world where we deal with rejection and loss, not so good days all the time. Now let's superimpose it on top of the imposter syndrome. Every day I wake up convinced that I'm an idiot, right? That I am a hack, that someday they're gonna find out that I have fooled all of you people, right? Imposter syndrome is awful. I deal with it all the time. And you know how you overcome the imposter syndrome? You know how you overcome the fact that maybe you're having a bad day because your grant didn't get funded? You inform people about science, and you get that look in their eyes of, aha. It might be your next door neighbor. It might be your dorm mate. It might be anybody. It might be somebody in your church group. But if you have an opportunity to talk science with anybody, you'd be amazed how excited people are when they can talk about science. So look at it as an opportunity. And I'm going to even go one step further and say that it might even make you a better scientist. So it's not a chore, it's an opportunity. And an opportunity to make a difference and satiate people, and you learn and they learn. I have this, and I hope this works today. When I give a talk, or if I know I'm going to be speaking to second graders or whomever about science, my goal is to do what I call make dinner. And make dinner is success for me in public engagement, is that tonight, when you go home and you're at dinner and somebody says, how'd today go? So you'll never believe I learned that oil spills are not necessarily the volume, it's about the location. That is making dinner. That when people take what you said and get excited to talk about it. That's the victory. That's the opportunity. And I can tell you it is just the best when you can make a difference. But you do it on your own comfort zone. And you do it in a non-rushed way. And it might be on Twitter. It might be anywhere. But think of it as an opportunity. Always want to think more about listening than lecturing. And this is not surprising, but I'm going to give you one perspective about why you want to listen more than lecture. When you deal with folks who are science denialism, or whether they're flat earth or anti-vaccine, my take is they're not dumb. Right? We don't want to disrespect them or anything like that. And you might not be able to change somebody's mind. But if you listen to people about what they think and how they take the knowledge that they have and where they got the knowledge, and that's how they formulate their ideals. You listen to people. You'd be amazed about how much of a better science communicator you are. Because you might not change this person about a vaccine, but how they framed what they got their knowledge might be useful to you the next day. So listening is, and this is hard for me because I like to talk, is better than lecturing. And you'd be surprised again that when you're a scientist and somebody is being able to talk and you listening to them, it makes their day. A lot of people have never met a scientist before. Again, I'm a firm believer of building trust and being respectful. There are a lot of people out there in my life who I've been incredibly impressed with who don't have a research group, haven't written 2,000 papers, and they're informative, they're useful, and they can make meaningful and actionable change. And they're out there. You want to find those people. You want to align yourself with their people. You want to find ways to work with these people. You want to be aware of them. Look for smart people out there. There's a lot of them, and align yourself with them. I've been to a lot and have been part of a lot of these science communication workshops. And they're fine. And they get up there, and I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but they say, don't use the metric system. Don't use jargon, and work on your elevator speech. And they say, go, good luck, and get out there. And what they don't talk about is that every engagement, you should think about what the risk versus the reward is. You can go do your own research. Doing a great job in public engagement in the US academic system matters zero practically now. We'd like it to have more value, but it doesn't. In many respects, communicating science at this point is hard. There's a lot of chances for making a mistake, and it might hurt your career. And so as you move forward, you want to look for low risk, high rewards. And where are they? On a local scale. Because if I draw the structure of DDT incorrectly to my next door neighbor, he doesn't care, right? Because probably I already told him what happened, right? The stakes are incredibly low, right? And it's easy and it's attainable. And I know that this guy's not going to think any less of me. And along the way, me communicating what DDT is and, how Mueller won the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine and all that stuff, people are excited about it. The trick is working on a local scale is low risk, high reward, easily done, and at your own comfort zone. I don't like it when people talk about communicating science. They say, oh, you got to go up and stand in front of 40 people. Some people don't want to talk in front of people. Some people are really good at Twitter. Then you do your thing. You find where you're comfortable. You look for opportunities that make a difference. You constantly evaluate whether or not you're doing a good job, and you work from it. You treat public engagement and outreach the way you treat your research. You're constantly evaluating your performance. You're searching for excellence. You might have taken a 3-hour workshop and you say, oh, I've got a license to talk science. True, but it's more like a permit and not a NASCAR. And you get better when you do it. And you can talk science all the time within reason. And I'll talk about that in 1 second. Again, starting local. Again, I want to go back to this. Local, local, local. Studies have shown, and it happens a lot. If you live in Wyoming and there's a talking head on the news who's never even been to Wyoming, telling them that we got to shut down everything, and they're doing it kind of a matter-of-factly, it doesn't get taken over well. But if you have somebody from Wyoming telling the people in Wyoming, like, listen, I know that we're going to miss the state fair this year, and I know that it's going to lose a lot of money, and I know your daughter has been really excited to put her, her cow in the best cow contest, but this is why we have to do this. That framing your information in the context of what matters to people matters, and that's local. Local is geographic, it's cultural. It's trying to find these common bonds because that's who you will listen to in the early stages. Now you can start building up. Firm believer, always work local, low risk, high reward, and attainable. Okay, I told you that you could do science, talk science all the time. But let me talk about my last reading. Family time. Part of being a good communicator is knowing when the right time to speak is. Just because you're passionate about science doesn't mean that the people you love are going to feel the same way. For example, my wife, Bryce, and I used to enjoy watching the crime show CSI together. But there was a problem. My running commentary on the feasibility of whatever was happening would drive her crazy. I would say things like, they would never get DNA results that fast. Or, that chemical is colorless. Why did they make it blue? Or, that's not the right word. And my all-time favorite, they don't mean precise, they mean accurate. This would be inevitably followed by, honey, shush. I'm trying to watch the show. And I tried, and I really did, but eventually we had to work out a compromise. I was allowed to have one, they can't do that, per episode. But for the rest of the time, I had to keep my mouth shut. Your family probably doesn't want to be in science class when you're just hanging out together, and that's okay. It just means that when you choose to explain something, they're more likely to explain it. Understand it. Listen, explain. This is when you don't have your reading glasses. They're more likely to listen. All right. I have 3 kids. Love them. And I'm going to give you some advice, especially graduate students here. Don't let science define you. Don't make your science career and what you're doing in grad school your identity. Don't live one life as a graduate student or a postdoc doing science. It is a terrible way to live because, amongst many other things, when you're having a bad day, when your grant gets rejected or things are going sideways, you do not want that to affect your lives at 5 o'clock. Science can wait. It'll be okay. Enjoy life. Don't let it get the best of you. It's going to be there. Science is a very good friend, an incredibly loyal friend. It'll be there, and you can get back to it, but don't let it consume you. Because when things go wrong, they go wrong. And I can tell you, for many years, I thought myself as scientist and scientist only. And there were times when things went bad, and I went bad. And the more I appreciated the fact that I was a dad and a husband, more than a scientist, life got a whole lot easier. And so don't let science define you. Okay, last, I have a book coming out. Maybe we'll do another one. Kids' book about being a scientist, coming out in a month. I want to acknowledge, on top of Jim Quinn, I have the unique pleasure to be kindergarten through Ph.D. in Rhode Island public schools. They have done me right. Chester W. Barrows, Cranston, K through 4, Edgewood Highlands, 5th and 6th grade. Parkview, 7th, 8th, 9th. Cranston East, 10, 11, 12. I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry at Rhode Island College, and I got my Ph.D. here. Best money spent. For years, I used to say, oh, I didn't go to Caltech, and I didn't do this, and I went to Rhode Island College, and it was a state commuter school. Fun fact, I got an incredibly great education, and it was cheap. My first semester of college, Rhode Island College, was $380. And I got as good of an education as any place else. So I love the fact that my public education has got me here, and URI is part of it. So I'll take any other questions and go from there, and thanks for your interest in being such a good audience.
Thank you, Chris. So I have the cube. I don't know if I'm going to dare to toss it. If you saw me in the horseshoe competition at the CRC party the other day, you wouldn't want me to toss it. But anyway, any questions for Chris? Yes? Okay. I'm trying.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, thank you.
They really are
Sorry.
throwing it. I thought it was a joke.
In both like your professional career and just like one-on-one interactions with people, how do you combat people constantly trying to like politicize science? Either if it be like in your family with like climate issues or just like we talked about like COVID. How do you like combat that?
It's hard, right? I mean, these are hard things, right? People think and make decisions on how it matters to their belly, their wallet, and their brain, right? And those are the three avenues. And sometimes you cannot convince people. And, you do your best, right? And more often than not, you might listen to them about where they're getting the information. But you have to accept very clearly that you might not win. And that walking is a better way to do it. Now, some people might go out there and say, oh, that's not the way. We need to fight the good fight on science. And I say no, that you pick your battles wisely because you want to make every interaction a net positive. And you don't want to spar because we have a certain series of rules about how we do things. And unfortunately, it doesn't work well when you spar with people who don't follow the rules. And it can be exquisitely frustrating. I have been invited to be on these kind of panels where I would go mano a mano with, some denialism. I won't do it. And I bet you I could hang. But I just don't think that's an opportunity where I can make a difference. And so, important to know where they're getting the information, important to try to understand where they're coming from, be willing to walk away, but keep in the back of your mind opportunities down the road where you can make a difference. Right? You have to be strategic, right? And say, funny you say that, right? And maybe you're explaining to them why it's sunny that day. And then you can go back and close the loop. Communicating science, like science, is the long game. So you might have to walk away on one day, but maybe you can win in months and years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Veronica, I'm going to come around.
Thank you. First, thanks,
Oh,
Chris.
hi, Veronica. How are you?
I know, it's great. It's funny.
Thanks for coming.
You bet. You're an alum. Also, it harks back to, I remember we had a NEARS meeting out on Block Island.
Yes,
Probably
yes.
20 years ago when
Yeah.
we were just kind of starting communicating science, and you led a workshop on it. And it's just so great to see you continuing with this. And thank you. So a question I have for you is, you're talking to the public about something, and you think, oh, great, I'm just going to show this one graph because I think it gets the point across. And you show it, and their eyes glaze over. So how do you deal with that?
That is incredibly hard, right? I once gave a talk after an oil spill in 2003 in Buzzards Bay, and a week later they had this town hall meeting, and I was so excited because I had the most cutting edge chromatograms, these beautiful, elegant chromatograms. And I showed them to them, and I was convinced I was going to win the Nobel Prize. And you know what people said to me afterwards? They go, I have no idea what you talked about, but I thought your pictures were really pretty. And I thought, again, that I had great information, and they liked the colors. And it's just hard, right? But you have to go back, and this is where I go and read the sports page. I'm always looking at graphics from other fields, right? Look at how other people present results, whether it's in Facebook. Look at the things where you say, oh, wow, that's a really interesting way. That's the trick, is to try to find out what matters to people, but making graphics that we think look good, but what they use all the time in other mainstream things. What you don't want to use is Excel default times with mauve and burnt orange, right? But it's tricky, but I think the key is constantly be looking at what your audience uses for information. And does this audience more likely to read the Promise Journal Bulletin? Are they going to more likely read Sports Illustrated? Are they going to be more want to watch CNN or whatever, and look at how they present their results? There's no easy answers. That's the problem with it.
Thanks, but that's a really good thing to do. Actually, and while I have this, I'm just going to tell you, as the alum coordinator, I want a picture of you and Paula and Jim Quinn before
Absolutely.
you leave. So,
All right,
Paula knows what to do.
we got that.
Thank you.
Only 2 questions. I bombed today. Come on.
Right, well, we do have a little reception after, outside. Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry.
I'll ask a question.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's something remarkably comforting about holding this thing. I don't know what it is. Chris, I thought that was great. You definitely made me, I spent the last 2 years of my career as like the ranking climate scientist at NASA, so I get the whole attack syndrome.
Yeah.
And I definitely hear you on trying to maintain your cool when you're engaged by people who, may be spouting their opinion that
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do with data, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to make a comment related to that and something you said at the end. I recently watched this stand-up comedian, Trevor Noah. Have you guys heard of Trevor Noah? And he made this comment that when he travels internationally, everybody, introduces themselves, but Americans introduce themselves as their career.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Paula. I'm an oceanographer. It gets back to like your first point and your closing point, right?
Yeah.
And that just is like something that really struck me in your book and in your talk, which is we are not necessarily our careers.
No.
We should be more than that.
Yeah.
And I find, given your story about your girlfriend leaving you because you worked after 4,
Yeah.
how did you go about in your life, having the impact that you did, 2,000 papers, 200 patents, and finding those boundaries? And I think that's a challenging question for a lot of people.
I got sober in the summer of 2004. I met my wife 2 weeks later. Those were milestones for me. I got lucky, right? My girlfriend broke up with me. There's actually more to it. She said, I don't want to live with you forever because I'll always be second place to you. And I'd rather marry a postman. She married a postman. I think she was seeing the postman beforehand. But I want to talk about, you brought something up, which is that it gets really hard communicating science, and you can get really frustrated. And I have become kind of an aficionado of TikTok. And I like TikTok because I'm a woodworker. I like to learn all these things. But the other thing I love to watch are other scientists on TikTok. And I follow like 15 to 20 of them, most of them in the medical profession. And most of them are really, really good. And I've learned a lot of tricks from them. and incredibly invaluable. But sooner or later, all of them don't walk. And this is what happens to them. And it is their downfall. And this is when they should shut their computer off. They get so frustrated in exchanging comments that they finally go, all right, do you want to listen to that guy or do you want to listen to me? I went to Bronx Science. I went to Caltech in 4 years. I got my Ph.D. at MIT. I was a postdoc here. I was a postdoc here. And I got tenure in 4 years. And I was a career, NSF career, blah, 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 blah. That is the absolute worst. Most people do not want to get and be flexed by their CV for two reasons. One, it sounds like an elitist. And two, most people don't know what a postdoc is. They don't know what an NSF career grant is. They don't know any of that stuff. And so when you start flexing on people and saying, I'm better than you, you will lose every time. And it always happens. And you can see them, their bodies are turning. There's this medical doctor, an ER doctor, he's so good, but he, once in a while, he does it and he drops his CV. Don't ever drop your CV in that way. There are ways to do it, but don't do it when you say, I'm smarter than you because I have a PhD. You will always lose.
Okay.
Hi. Just speaking of opinions, how do you go about when someone has a different opinion or they have their own opinion that isn't necessarily wrong, but you're still trying to get your point across? Like, how do you get to that common ground where you could still get to what you have to say?
Kind of going back, sometimes you don't have enough time, right? And this happens. And you know, you listen and you try to get your 2 cents in. But the way in which you win, at least for me, is follow-up. Right? So maybe you're in a conversing with somebody and you know who they are and you know their email address. You win on the follow-up. You win on, because now you have time to formulate your response. And you have a way in which you can clarify your thoughts. And you can do it in a way that is clear, and you send it to them. And while you might not change their mind, you've done two things. One, you've cemented and clarified your points. And if the person is reasonable, they'll respect the fact that you did that, and it goes a long way. By responding to people in an earnest, honest way, you build respect and trust. And the other thing is, the E in email is evidence. When you use email, you are now putting something in the record, and that is valuable for you as well. So go the long game. Same thing I just said to you as well. Go the long game, listen, learn, get them back on the follow-up. If it's okay to walk away and come back on your own terms, where the reward is higher and the risk is lower.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap up because we do have a little, some snacks outside. And I think, Chris, you're going to, do you have your books?
I will. I have lots of them. God, yeah, anybody wants them. Yeah. I got 3 kids to put through college. Yeah, they're out there for sale. I'll sign them. Happy to talk with you. And if I don't get a chance to talk to you, please email me. If you're a teacher and you wish I would talk to your class, I will Zoom. I will go to the opening of an envelope to talk about this stuff. I will go to a Cub Scout meeting. Let me know. I'll do it.
Oh, bravo.
I have a little Coastal Institute t-shirt.
Oh,
for you.
nice.
That's a little thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, all right.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.